many of you have seen this? It's a new book called Building Up a New World, Congregational Organizing for Transformative Impact. Anybody? I know this is not in the New York Times bestsellers list yet, but it is being flashed around the UCC because this is the 2025 recommended everyone should read it in the United Church of Christ. So I said, okay, I like buying books, and I got this one, and then they have also said, so let me just say, this is a book comprised of essays, and from authors, single and doubles, duets, all people talking about radical justice and ending structures of violence and oppression that are the very foundation of some of our American systems. And I'm seeing the looks around there going, And if that is too radical a statement for you, I hope not, because good trouble, as John Lewis describes it, is a pretty intentional, radical, or it's called radical by those whose power is being challenged. Make sense? And if this isn't radical enough for you, well then, Wednesdays at 11, we're going to be talking about this book, so I'm just giving you the little bit off the top. And I hope you will come and explore some of the ideas in this book, because I think it is worth taking a look at. And this week's chapter, the season that we're in is called Easter, and the UCC also said, hey, you should preach this after Easter. And so I said, great. And then I read the book and I said, whoa. And here we go. So it's a little out of sequence if you get the book, but this is chapter 14, and it has the audacity, chapter 14, to suggest that we, the church, have good intentions, but sometimes we miss the mark. I mean, really, don't they know we're the UCC? Just kidding, that's a joke. Of course we miss the mark. We're disciples, and the ancient disciples missed the marks too, right? Right? Okay. But especially our friend Peter. And if we recall back to Holy Week, the story of when push came to shove, Peter was in it for himself. Do you know Jesus? Nope, never heard of the guy, he says 3 times. And even in our story this morning, he's got to be he's for himself in the sense that he leaves all the disciples and he just jumps off the boat. I love me some Peter because I can identify with him. In our book, chapter 14, it opens with the Latin American saying, Hoy por ti, mañana por mí. Or in English, today for you, tomorrow for me. And it reminds me a little bit of a story I remember hearing from one of my colleagues in seminary when I lived in New York. And I can't remember who told me the story. I know that it was one of my African colleagues. And they said that at home, if someone had a bag of M&Ms on the bus, they would take an M&M and then they would share the bag around the bus. And it didn't matter who was on the bus, they just knew that whatever size bag they had, they would take some and they would pass it around. And then in America, in New York City, this clearly wasn't happening. And she just said, it's even a small bag, or a large bag, and they just sit there and they eat it all by themselves on the bus. And I remember thinking about this and saying, yes, the bag is marked individual. And I myself have had large bags of candy and have not shared them. So we were having this moment and he just said, Diana, it's so rude. And I was like, I hear you. But honestly, I don't want to share my M&Ms with you. And I don't know why I would share them with people I don't know. I mean, I feel generous when I share with my friend who is sitting next to me. It says individual bag. And I am an individual. I wonder, in our story, when Peter is thinking, what he is thinking when they've had breakfast, The risen Christ is among them. And Jesus looks at Peter, who has denied him, and he says, "Do you love me?" "Yes," Peter responds. And we can say a lot about what does that word love mean, and I've preached on that before, but I want to look at what he says next. "Feed my sheep." Feed my sheep. Do sheep eat M&Ms? They could. One of the phrases I keep hearing kicked around in our culture today, especially by people who are organizing, so our radical friends and neighbors, but also by younger people, by people on the margins, by younger queer people, and people who simply have less than I do. They keep talking about mutual aid. I keep hearing this phrase, and I like both of the words. I like mutual, and I like aid. But until reading this chapter 14, I didn't really have a good grasp on what they meant in terms of what is mutual aid. And so here is a definition rough from the book. Mutual aid creates alternative structures of justice within an unjust system, modeling what is possible when we live through an ethic of sharing rather than scarcity. Mutual aid brings us back to basic human instincts and the initial vision of the church. Mutual aid is revolutionary, yet ancient, deeply challenging, yet inanely human, all in one. But because of the way we internalize power, ideas about charity, the deserving or undeserving, poor, racism, classism, and elitism, we have to retrain ourselves to return to our instincts of sharing and the gospel call of collective salvation. And according to these authors, mutual aid stands somewhat in opposition to charity, in the sense that with charity, there are givers and there are receivers, and everyone knows what side you want to be on in that divide. No one wants to be in the space of having to ask for help or be in need. That might be why it is so difficult for me and others like me to ask for help. I will steal your M&M, but I probably won't ask you for one. We know where the power lies in the relationship between asking and giving in terms of charity. And these authors go so far as to suggest that charity, quote, redistributes just enough money to those the economy is devastating, exploiting, and dispossessing, so that corporations and the uber-rich appear good-willed and thus deserving of the power and tax breaks they have. I see some eyebrows going up. Well, I have some feelings about that too. And I have some feelings, good and otherwise, about nonprofits. And yet I can appreciate these authors and their wider lens. Another concern that they raise is that charity reinforces the economic status quo by ensuring that decision-making power remains in the hands of the elite. And again, there is a power over dynamic that is an undercurrent in charity. Feed my sheep, Jesus says. A shepherd cares for sheep, but also the shepherd's fate, livelihood, and life is bound up with those same sheep. A shepherd gives everything and lives fully with and for others. Feed my sheep. The sheep become your tribe, and together you weather storms and shortages and dangers together. Now, I really like community, and I really like the idea of the kind of community that's going to share all their M&Ms. And yet, I baked a sour cream coffee cake at Christmas, And I decided it's one of our family traditions, and I decided I would bake one for a neighbor on either side of us on our street. And I was feeling so excited and so, into the holidays. And to my surprise, I walked over, and both families returned the gift immediately. The first house said, "Oh, come in," and they had a family gathering, which they do frequently, and they wouldn't let me leave until I took food home with me to share. And I thought, well, this is pretty good, and I went and I got the next cake, and I took it the other direction. And the second home accepted the food and said thank you, and then the next week they just brought food over. There was a knock on my door, and beautiful food started to come into our home. This is where I should probably tell you that both families are originally from Mexico, where culturally no one wants to be beholden. And it's more of a mutual aid space. And so if a gift is given, another is given in return. No one is better than another for giving, and no one is less than for receiving, because it goes both ways. Equality. Now it's tricky because I wasn't giving them something to get something back, and so it kind of took me by surprise. But I realized that by accepting their gifts, we were even. There was no charity. We were mutually giving to one another. And while that doesn't feel the same, it feels a little bit different, for me at least. I realized today that everyone got a really special holiday treat from a neighbor that they weren't expecting. And maybe, hopefully, I started a tradition of cake giving and tamale receiving, and I'm really excited about that. It's a great tradition. Thanks be to God, let's keep it up. Hoy por ti, mañana por mí. Today for you, tomorrow for me. M&Ms for all. May we all be so blessed. Amen.